Captain Alira Voss stood on the balcony of the towering Earth Command spire, her eyes scanning the horizon. The vast, glittering city sprawled beneath her, a testament to humanity's progress, its skyscrapers reaching up toward the stars like monuments to their resilience. Yet despite the beauty and prosperity, Alira felt an unease gnawing at the edge of her thoughts. Her mind was preoccupied with the new recruits, young men and women, most still wet behind the ears, who had come to the Crimson Guard expecting glory, only to be faced with the brutal reality of war. She turned back into the command center, where the recruits were gathered, awaiting her briefing. The high-ceilinged hall was filled with a buzz of nervous chatter, each young soldier trying to make sense of their place in the galaxy. It was here that the new generation of humanity's finest would be forged into the deadliest fighting force in the Empire. Yet, Alira knew that no amount of training could prepare them for the challenges that lay ahead. "Attention," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. The room fell silent. The recruits, all in their crisp new uniforms, snapped to attention. "Welcome to the Crimson Guard," she began, her voice carrying the weight of experience and authority. "You're here because you have proven yourselves. You're here because Earth needs you. The Empire has its enemies, and we, the Crimson Guard, are humanity's first line of defense." She paused, letting the words settle in. The air in the room felt charged, a mix of excitement and fear hanging in the balance. Alira was no stranger to the pressures of command. But this new batch of recruits, they were different. They weren't the hardened soldiers she'd once led, but kids, barely out of their teens. Some of them had barely seen combat. They had no idea what they were about to face. "As of now," she continued, "you are not just soldiers. You are the vanguard, the Empire's shield against the unknown." She walked along the front row, her gaze sweeping over each recruit. "But remember this, most of you will not make it through your first mission. The enemy we face is unlike any we fought before. They are ruthless, and they do not hesitate. But you," she said, looking directly into the eyes of the young soldiers, "will be the ones who decide whether we survive or fall." The recruits exchanged glances, the weight of her words sinking in. Alira could see the nervousness in their eyes, but there was something else there too. A spark. They were scared, but they were determined. She admired that. The fear of the unknown was a powerful motivator, and it would push them to become something greater than they could imagine. One of the recruits, a tall young man with dark hair and a scar running along his jaw, spoke up, his voice unsteady, but filled with resolve. "Captain Voss, what's our first mission?" Alira gave a slight nod, her gaze hardening as she turned to the large holomap projected before her. "We've just received word of an emergency from the colony on Syrtis." She tapped a button, and the image of a barren, rocky planet appeared. Syrtis is a frontier world, vital to our Empire's expansion in this sector. We've lost contact with the colony, and their emergency beacons have gone silent. The last message we received indicated an unknown force in the area. The recruits leaned in, listening intently as Alira's voice lowered, becoming grim. "It could be raiders," she said, "or it could be something far worse. We don't know yet, but what we do know is that we need to get there fast. A full deployment of the Crimson Guard will leave in the next 12 hours. You've been chosen because of your skills, your potential. Don't let Earth down." The tension in the room was palpable. The young recruits exchanged uneasy looks, the realization hitting them that this was no training exercise. This was real. Their first mission would be a trial by fire, and many of them wouldn't make it back. The gravity of the situation set in like a physical weight, but there was no turning back now. Alira looked out over her recruits one last time. "I don't care where you're from, or what you've been through before. You're no longer civilians. You're soldiers of the Empire. And when you wear that uniform, you represent every man, woman, and child in our Empire. You fight for humanity." She let that final statement hang in the air, feeling the collective pulse of the room. Humanity's future rested on their shoulders. She had seen countless recruits before, but something about this group felt different. She could sense it, a hunger to prove themselves, to show that they were more than just young faces. Her voice softened, though still carrying the weight of authority. "Get some rest. We leave for Syrtis in 12 hours. Be ready." The recruits nodded in unison, their determination growing as the reality of their mission began to take hold. As they filed out of the room, Alira's thoughts lingered on the unknown threat awaiting them on Syrtis. The Kurith, raiders, or something worse. She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. They would have to fight with everything they had. Because if they failed, the consequences would be far worse than any of them could imagine. The journey to Syrtis was a blur of hurried preparations and tactical briefings. Alira spent the hours before departure overseeing every detail, ensuring her team was ready for what awaited them. The recruits, while still green, were focused and eager to prove themselves. She could see the nerves in their eyes, but there was also a fierce resolve, something raw that could be honed with time. Time, however, was something they didn't have. As the transport ship broke through the atmosphere of Earth and entered the cold expanse of space, Alira stood at the front of the command deck, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The darkness of space seemed infinite, and yet there was something unsettling about it today, a palpable tension in the air, as if the cosmos themselves were holding their breath. The ship's AI pinged, breaking her reverie. "Captain Voss, we are approaching the orbit of Syrtis. Estimated time to arrival, 15 minutes. Alira nodded. She turned to the communications officer, Lieutenant Jara, who was monitoring the incoming transmissions. "Anything new from the colony?" Jara's brow furrowed as she scrolled through the incoming data. "Negative, Captain. Still no response from the colony's emergency beacon. But there's something strange." "What is it?" "The data's corrupted," Jara replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "It doesn't match anything we've seen before. The last known transmission wasn't a distress signal. It was a coded transmission, encrypted with an alien language." Alira's pulse quickened. A silent alarm went off in her head. Coded by whom? "That's the issue, Captain. It's not a language we've encountered before, not even in the archives of the Empire. It's unlike anything we've deciphered." The thought of an unknown enemy using unfamiliar technology to interfere with Empire systems made her uneasy, but there was no time to dwell on it. They were moments away from landing. Alira turned to the recruits, gathered in the briefing room, their faces a mixture of excitement and dread. "You've been trained for this," Alira said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "The Xorith are known for their brutal tactics, but we don't know if this attack is theirs. We may be facing a new enemy, or worse, multiple threats. Your mission is simple. Secure the colony, assess the situation, and eliminate any hostile forces. Understood?" "Yes, Captain." The recruits responded in unison, their voices sharp. Alira could see the fire in their eyes, but she knew they weren't ready for what was coming. No one ever truly was. She clasped her hands behind her back, masking the unease she felt within. The transport shuddered as it broke through Syrtis' atmosphere, the rocky surface of the planet looming larger with every passing second. A thick haze hung over the colony's capital city, visible even from space. The once thriving settlement now appeared eerily lifeless, the distant skyscrapers casting long shadows across the barren ground. The faint flicker of lights in the colony's lower levels suggested signs of life, but it was hard to tell just how much of the city had been overrun. "Deploy in 5, Alira ordered, her voice steady. The recruits moved quickly, following the standard procedures they had practiced countless times in simulations. But this was no simulation. This was real. The cargo bay doors opened with a low hum, revealing the barren surface of Syrtis. Alira led the charge, stepping out onto the dusty ground, the cold air biting at her skin. The rest of the team followed closely behind, their boots thudding against the cracked earth. The colony's high-rise buildings were silent, like tombstones in the vast emptiness. Alira's HUD flickered to life, displaying a map of the area, as her tactical gear provided constant updates. Nothing seemed amiss, yet. They made their way toward the central power station, where the beacon signal had been traced to last. Alira's sharp eyes scanned the environment, alert for any signs of movement. The colony, which had once been bustling with the sounds of daily life, was unnervingly quiet. The only noise was the distant whirring of the transport ship's engines overhead. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered. A loud, ear-splitting crash echoed through the air. Alira's heart skipped a beat as the ground beneath her feet trembled. From the shadows of a nearby alleyway, figures emerged, tall, armored forms, their features obscured by the dark plating of their exosuits. They were humanoid, but their movements were jerky, almost mechanical. "Contacts," Alira shouted. "Take cover." Before she could give another order, the figures lunged toward them, weapons raised. The sound of plasma fire filled the air as the recruits scrambled for cover. Alira fired back, her aim precise, cutting down one of the attackers with a well-placed shot to the chest. The figures didn't fall. They didn't seem to feel the impact. Instead, they staggered and adjusted, like automatons in a malfunction. "These aren't Sorith," one of the recruits shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Stay calm," Alira barked, her voice sharp with authority. "Focus and keep your positions." But it was clear that this wasn't an ordinary attack. The attackers were not just advanced in their weapons. They seemed different. They didn't react like normal soldiers. They were relentless, driven by something beyond basic tactics. And with each passing second, it became more apparent. This was no raid. This was a premeditated strike. Something far more dangerous was unfolding. The firefight on the streets of Sirtis Colony had erupted into chaos. The armored figures, moving with unnatural precision, continued their assault on the Crimson Guard. Despite the recruits' training, they were struggling to adapt to an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The attackers moved faster than human soldiers, their reactions too sharp, their aim too deadly. Alira's squad was pinned down, exchanging fire with foes who didn't flinch or stumble under the weight of their weapons' impact. Alira's pulse raced as she scanned the battlefield, calculating her next move. "Jara, I need intel now," she shouted into her comms, dodging a plasma bolt that singed the air beside her. The communications officer's voice crackled through her earpiece, frantic. "Captain, these aren't just random raiders. They're not even human." "What are they?" Alira demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Unknown, Captain. They're emitting a signal, some kind of encrypted code, but it's not like anything we've ever seen. I've traced it back to a satellite deep in the outer rim of the galaxy. The code matches data we intercepted years ago, but we thought it was just old junk." "What data?" Alira interrupted. "It's from the Ivoran Syndicate," Jara said, her voice tense. "They've been making quiet moves for years, slowly infiltrating different sectors. We thought they were just another fringe group, but this is something else entirely." The name hit Alira like a punch to the gut. The Ivoran Syndicate. They were a shadowy group of ancient aliens who had been involved in a number of covert operations against humanity. Rumors had circulated for decades about their vast influence, but the Empire had never been able to confirm much about them. Their goals were vague, their actions insidious, but always cloaked in secrecy. To hear they were involved in the attack on Sirtis was a chilling revelation. "That's impossible," Alira muttered. "The Ivorans should be isolated in their own part of the galaxy. They've been quiet for decades. What the hell are they doing here?" "We don't know yet, Captain," Jara replied, her voice filled with urgency. "But it looks like they've either partnered with the Xorith or they've got a new weapon. These attackers, they're not acting like typical soldiers. They're different, almost like drones, but with the intelligence of a seasoned fighter. They're being controlled remotely, or by something else." Alira's mind raced. The Xorth had been known for their mindless brutality, their unyielding rage in battle, but this was a different breed of enemy altogether. These were organized, strategic, almost cold-blooded, and the Ivoran Syndicate was notorious for creating advanced technology and dark alliances to further their cause. If they had merged forces with the Xorth or were experimenting with their own advanced weapons, Earth's empire was facing an unprecedented threat. "Everyone, hold your ground," Alira barked into her comms, rallying her team. "We need to neutralize these enemies and get to the central command center. Jara, I need a direct link to that satellite. Find out who or what is pulling the strings." "We're working on it, Captain," Jara said, the tension in her voice growing. "But be careful. I'm seeing more and more signals pop up. They're preparing for something big." Alira didn't wait for more details. She knew the situation was dire. If these attackers were just the beginning of a larger Ivoran plot, they were running out of time. "Vance, clear a path to the command center," she ordered, locking her gaze on one of the recruits, a tall, muscular soldier with a quick trigger finger. "The rest of you, stay sharp. We move out in 5. Vance nodded, his face grim, and motioned to his squad. They'd been in firefights before, but nothing like this. As the recruits rallied behind him, Alira motioned for Jara to keep feeding them updates. She needed to know where the enemy was and how much they were dealing with. The tension in the air was thick, the pulse of danger beating just out of reach, and yet every second felt more uncertain than the last. The team moved swiftly through the broken streets, using the cover of abandoned vehicles and ruined buildings to avoid enemy fire. The attackers were relentless, pursuing them at every turn, but the Crimson Guard was skilled, their movements synchronized, their discipline holding steady in the face of overwhelming odds. Alira pushed them harder, urging them forward. As they approached the central power station, a structure that once radiated with life, now dark and ominous, the full scale of the invasion became evident. Hundreds, if not thousands, of the armored attackers were converging on the facility, forming a perimeter that seemed impenetrable. The power station's once imposing gates were now battered and broken, and the entryway was swarming with hostile forces. Alira's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. "This is it. We push forward, no hesitation. We can't let them get to the core systems. If they control the power station, they control the planet. We hold this line. For humanity." Her words steeled her soldiers, and they advanced, weapons raised and ready for what awaited inside. As they stormed the gates, a series of loud, resonant explosions erupted around them, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The recruits flinched, instinctively diving for cover. "Get ready. They're closing in," Alira shouted. Then, as the smoke cleared, the true horror of the situation revealed itself. The attackers weren't just soldiers. They were something more, something engineered. Alira's heart sank as she saw them for what they truly were: cybernetic soldiers, hybrid creations of flesh and machine, controlled perhaps by the Ivoran Syndicate. It wasn't just a raid. It was an invasion. The attack on the central power station intensified as Alira and her team pushed deeper into the ruins of the complex. The recruits were all on high alert, moving with deadly precision as they cleared rooms and hallways, cutting down the cybernetic soldiers that blocked their way. But the deeper they went, the more they realized that the stakes were higher than they had anticipated. This wasn't just an isolated strike. It was a well-coordinated attack designed to cripple the heart of the colony, to sever its connection to the Empire's core systems. "Keep moving," Alira shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. The crackle of gunfire and the hiss of plasma rounds filled the air, mingling with the sound of boots pounding on the metal floors. The recruits, while still inexperienced, were starting to find their rhythm, their training kicking in as they took cover and returned fire. But even as they advanced, Alira could sense the overwhelming force of their enemies closing in on them. The cybernetic soldiers they were facing were relentless. Faster, stronger, and more durable than anything human soldiers had encountered before. The air hummed with the constant pulse of their energy weapons, a harsh reminder of how outclassed they were. But the Crimson Guard was determined to fight back, to hold the line long enough to reach the core systems and shut down the enemy's control. "Jara, any updates?" Alira called out, her eyes scanning the hallway ahead, her fingers tightening around her weapon. "I'm getting partial access to the satellite network, Captain." Jara's voice crackled in her earpiece. "It's worse than we thought. The Ivoran Syndicate has launched a full-scale invasion, not just on Syrtis, but on multiple frontier worlds. These soldiers, they are using a network of encrypted drones, all tied to a central hub somewhere within the power station. If they succeed, they'll control every major colony in this sector." "Can you trace the hub?" Alira asked, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm working on it, but the encryption is unlike anything I've seen. It's like they've upgraded their technology with something ancient. We're going to need more time." "Time we don't have," Alira muttered, her gaze hardening as the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. The attackers were getting closer, closing in from all sides. Without hesitation, Alira issued the command. "Vance, take point. Secure the control room. We need that hub offline now." Vance nodded sharply, leading the charge with his squad as they sprinted toward the control room doors. Alira followed closely behind, her senses heightened, every muscle in her body attuned to the threat. The air was thick with tension, the anticipation almost unbearable. The doors to the control room were reinforced, a heavy metal barrier that had once been designed to keep invaders out. But now, it was the Crimson Guard's only hope of stopping the invasion before it spread too far. "Ready," Vance shouted. "On 3. 1, 2, 3, Alira barked. With a synchronized effort, Vance and his squad planted explosive charges on the door. The countdown was agonizing, each second dragging on as the enemy closed in. Alira's heart raced. They had no backup. This was a one-way mission. If they didn't breach the control room, the entire colony would fall. The explosion rocked the building, sending shockwaves through the metal walls. Dust and debris flew in all directions as the door crumpled under the blast. The team charged in, weapons raised, but they were met with immediate resistance. The control room was a vast, open space filled with towering terminals and consoles, all glowing with the soft, pulsing light of active systems. And at the center, surrounded by a group of cybernetic soldiers, stood a tall, cloaked figure. The Ivoran Syndicate's operatives had long been rumored to operate through remote control, never seen in person, but now, Alira realized, this was no ordinary commander. This was a leader, someone who had engineered this entire invasion from the shadows. The cloaked figure turned, its face hidden by a metallic mask, but its presence was overwhelming. It radiated an air of authority and command, like a predator who had already claimed its prey. And in its hands, it held a strange device, an ancient-looking relic that hummed with a strange energy. "Captain Voss," the figure's voice rang out, low and distorted, as if filtered through layers of technology. "You are too late. The Empire is weak, its borders crumbling, and now we will rise. The Syndicate will control this galaxy. You are nothing more than an obstacle, a fleeting resistance." Alira's blood ran cold. This was the architect of the invasion. This was the enemy that had been lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. "You won't win," Alira spat, her voice filled with venom. "Humanity will fight back. We always do." The figure tilted its head slightly, a mocking gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "You fight for a dying cause, Captain. Look around you. Your empire is fractured. The Xorith are only the beginning. Soon, the Syndicate will be in control of everything. You can't stop us. No one can." With a sharp motion, the figure activated the device, and a low hum filled the room as the power stations around them began to pulse in unison. Alira felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, the energy building, reaching a critical mass. It was clear the figure wasn't just controlling the station. He was turning it into a weapon. "All units, engage," Alira shouted, her voice cutting through the static in the control room. The final battle for Certus was about to begin, and there was no turning back. She would stop this invasion, no matter the cost. The energy in the control room crackled with a raw, dangerous power. Alira's heart pounded as the cloaked figure activated the ancient device, and the hum of energy became almost deafening. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark rhythm, as if the building itself was coming alive under the Syndicate's control. It was clear that this wasn't just about taking over Certus. This was a full-scale weaponization of the planet's core systems. The Ivoran Syndicate wasn't merely interested in conquest. They were preparing to reshape the galaxy in their image. "Stop him," Alira shouted, her voice urgent and commanding. But before she could move, the figure raised a hand, and the room seemed to shift. The ground beneath her feet trembled as a wave of invisible energy slammed into her, throwing her backward. Alira's body slammed into a control panel, the impact leaving her dazed. For a moment, the world around her blurred, and a ringing sound filled her ears. She shook her head, trying to clear the dizziness, her pulse thudding in her temples. "Captain," Vance's voice broke through the haze. He was on the floor next to her, his face grim but focused. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Alira muttered, shaking off the disorientation. She pushed herself up, eyes narrowing as she took in the situation. The recruits had already engaged the cybernetic soldiers, but the cloaked figure remained calm, almost eerily so. His presence alone seemed to freeze the air, making the room feel colder, darker. The device in his hands pulsed with a steady rhythm, its energy growing stronger by the second. "Get to cover," Alira ordered, signaling to her team. "We need to disrupt that device. Take him down before it's too late." The recruits scrambled for position, taking cover behind consoles and pillars. The cybernetic soldiers, their glowing red eyes flickering in the dim light, moved with fluid, mechanical precision, blocking every exit and forcing the squad into close combat. Plasma bolts whizzed past, narrowly missing them as they returned fire, but the soldiers seemed unfazed, their metal frames absorbing the blasts with little effect. Alira's mind raced. The figure controlling the device was their primary target. If they didn't neutralize him, the entire power station would be lost, and with it, the rest of the galaxy. The Syndicate had already shown their ability to take entire colonies with ease, and now they had a weapon that could change the tide of the war. "Jara, any way to disable that thing?" Alira called out, eyes never leaving the cloaked figure. "I'm working on it, Captain." Jara's voice crackled through her comms. "But this tech is ancient. It's not responding to conventional signals. I might be able to jam it, but I'll need a few more minutes." Alira glanced at the recruits, who were slowly being overwhelmed by the relentless cybernetic soldiers. The situation was spiraling out of control, but they couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Vance," Alira shouted, turning to her trusted lieutenant, "we need to buy Jara those minutes. Get your squad to lay down suppressive fire. We take down that figure, or we're all dead." Vance nodded, his expression determined. On it, without another word, he signaled his squad to move forward. They shifted positions quickly, their weapons blazing as they created a perimeter around the control room, pinning down the cybernetic soldiers with a constant barrage of fire. The recruits fought back with everything they had, but the enemy soldiers were relentless, closing in on them like a tidal wave. Alira pressed forward, trying to get a clear shot at the cloaked figure. He was moving around the room with an unsettling grace, almost as though he knew exactly where to step to avoid their attacks. It was as if he wasn't just a leader. He was part of the weapon itself, tied to the ancient device in his hands. Every movement he made seemed to amplify the hum of energy radiating from the machine, making it more difficult for the recruits to focus. "Jara, how much longer?" Alira demanded, grit in her voice. "Almost there, Captain," Jara responded, her voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." A sudden explosion rocked the room, sending debris flying in all directions. Alira ducked instinctively, but Vance wasn't so lucky. A piece of shrapnel grazed his leg, causing him to fall to the floor with a grunt of pain. "Vance," Alira shouted, rushing to his side. "I'm good, Captain." Vance gritted through clenched teeth, trying to push himself up. "Just get that bastard." Alira's eyes locked onto the cloaked figure, who was now standing at the center of the control room, unscathed by the chaos unfolding around him. He raised the device higher, and the energy in the room pulsed again, sending waves of force outward. The recruits faltered, struggling to keep their footing as the very air seemed to crackle with power. But then, just as it seemed like all hope was lost, a surge of static erupted in Alira's earpiece. "Captain, it's ready." Jara's voice rang through. "I've disabled the signal. The device is offline." A moment of stunned silence passed as the humming sound that had filled the room began to fade. The cloaked figure's eyes widened in disbelief. His grip tightened on the device, but it was too late. Without the signal to power it, the machine sputtered and died, the energy in the room dissipating like a fading storm. "No," the figure screamed, his voice raw with fury. You think this will stop us? You are nothing." Alira's heart raced. "We'll see about that." With one swift motion, she drew her sidearm and fired. The shot hit the figure square in the chest, sending him stumbling back. But he didn't fall. Instead, his eyes glowed with a strange, almost supernatural light, and he reached for a hidden blade at his side. "Enough." The figure spat, lunging toward her with inhuman speed. Alira didn't hesitate. She raised her weapon again and fired 2 more shots. The figure staggered, then crumpled to the ground, his body twitching as the last remnants of his energy faded. The battle was far from over, but the heart of the invasion had been severed. For now, the Syndicate's plans were in ruins. But Alira knew this victory was only temporary. The war had just begun. The cloaked figure collapsed to the ground, his body twitching in its final moments. His grip on the ancient device loosened, and the hum that had filled the room faded into silence. Alira's breath came in heavy gasps as she stood over the fallen leader, her heart still racing from the intensity of the fight. Her team was still engaged in a vicious battle with the remaining cybernetic soldiers, but for the first time since the attack began, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Is it over?" Vance's voice came from behind her, strained but resolute. He had managed to get to his feet, his legs still bleeding, but his determination was unwavering. "For now," Alira replied, turning her gaze back to the fallen figure. "But this is far from over. The Syndicate will come again." She wasn't wrong. The room around them was still a war zone. The recruits had pushed back the cybernetic soldiers, but their numbers were overwhelming, and the room seemed to pulse with a malignant energy as the remaining enemies regrouped. The power station was still under threat, and the devastation from the Syndicate's assault was far from contained. They had merely struck at the surface of something much deeper. The control room was now silent except for the hum of failing systems and the occasional groan of the building under strain. The energy core, which had been on the brink of overloading, now seemed to stabilize, but the larger war was still raging outside, across the planet. "Jara," Alira said, raising her comms device. "I need an update. What's the status of the rest of the colony?" "I've patched into the colony's communication grid, Captain." Jara's voice crackled back. "The situation is worse than we feared. The Syndicate has infiltrated multiple power stations across the colony, and their forces are moving fast. The local defense forces have been decimated. We're still holding here, but we've got enemy forces closing in from all directions." "What's their goal?" Alira asked, her mind racing. The Syndicate's strategy wasn't clear. Why hit power stations? Why cripple the core infrastructure of the entire colony? I'm not sure, Jara replied, frustration clear in her tone. But they're not just disabling things. They're planting devices, tech we've never seen before. If they get their hands on the main hub, they'll control every piece of tech on the planet. We could be looking at a complete lockdown. Alira clenched her fists. The stakes had just escalated. This wasn't just about stopping an invasion. It was about preventing the Syndicate from turning the colony, and perhaps every colony they touched, into a slave to their technology. We need to move. Now, Alira said, snapping into command mode. She turned to Vance, her eyes hard. We've neutralized the leader, but we've still got a war to fight. Rally the recruits. We need to stop them before they gain total control. Vance nodded and turned to gather his squad, barking orders to the recruits. Even though they were exhausted, bloodied, and battered, they knew what was at stake. There was no time for rest. The battle wasn't won until the Syndicate's grip on Syrtis was completely broken. Alira turned to Vijara. Coordinate with the remaining defense units. We need to hit the other stations before the Syndicate completes their takeover. I'll get on it, Jara replied quickly. But Captain, you need to be aware. There's something else. The Syndicate's signals. They're coming from everywhere. We've intercepted a strange code. It's fragmented, but it's not random. Someone is directing this entire operation. We need to find that signal, and fast. Understood, Alira said, her voice low and determined. Once we've secured this facility, we'll start hunting that signal down. I'll need your support. Jara's voice was steady, if not a bit grim. Of course, Captain. Alira glanced around at her squad. There was no turning back now. If the Syndicate had truly infiltrated Syrtis and was operating on this scale, they were dealing with something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. The war wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the soul of the Empire itself. The Crimson Guard had always been humanity's shield, but they were about to become its sword, cutting through the shadows of this unseen enemy. Move out, Alira ordered, her tone sharp as a knife. The recruits, bloodied but unbowed, fell into line behind her, ready to continue the fight. They passed the body of the fallen Syndicate leader as they made their way toward the nearest exit, weapons drawn and ready. The broken consoles and shattered terminals marked their path, a grim reminder of what was at stake. The once pristine control center now resembled a battlefield, its walls scarred with the aftermath of the vicious assault. But in the face of destruction, there was resolve. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for its future. As they made their way down the corridors, the air seemed to hum with a new urgency. The stakes had just grown higher. They weren't just defending a colony anymore. They were fighting for the entire sector, for the heart of humanity's power in this corner of the galaxy. And if they lost, the consequences would be catastrophic. The deeper they moved into the complex, the more they encountered resistance. Cybernetic soldiers, bolstered by the strange, almost alien technology of the Syndicate, seemed to multiply as if summoned from the walls themselves. It was clear that the Syndicate had anticipated this counterattack, fortifying their position at every turn. Alira's thoughts were sharp, focused. They had to disrupt the Syndicate's operations before the entire colony descended into chaos. But the closer they got to the core systems, the clearer it became. This fight was far from over. And the Crimson Guard would need every ounce of strength. They had to stop the Syndicate from realizing their dark vision for the galaxy. We finish this here, Alira muttered under her breath, her determination steeling her as she pushed forward. We finish it all here. The corridors of the power station seemed to grow darker with each step. The metallic walls, once a symbol of humanity's technological progress, now felt like a tomb. The hum of the emergency lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the group as they pressed forward, their weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension, as if the very building itself was holding its breath. Alira's mind raced as she analyzed their next moves. They had neutralized the immediate threat, but the Syndicate's web stretched far beyond the control room. Their influence was everywhere. Every few steps, a low vibration underfoot reminded Alira that time was running out. The Syndicate had planted devices throughout the station, devices capable of overriding every security system, every locking mechanism, and every communication channel. If they didn't stop it now, the Syndicate would take complete control, and humanity would lose another foothold in the galaxy. "We're approaching the core systems," Alira said, her voice sharp. "This is it. Once we secure this, we cut off their control over the rest of the planet." Vance, limping slightly from his injury, but still keeping pace, nodded. "Understood, Captain. We'll make sure the Syndicate doesn't have a chance to take any more ground." Alira led the way, her eyes scanning every corner, every potential ambush point. The deeper they went, the more the building seemed to resist their presence. It wasn't just the Syndicate's forces. The very station itself felt like it was working against them, as if it had been infected by the same alien technology that powered the Syndicate's weapons. The air was thick, almost stifling, with a strange energy. "Stay sharp," she warned. "We're too close now. They'll do anything to stop us." As they neared the final set of doors leading into the core control room, a sudden loud thud echoed through the hall. A series of rapid footsteps followed, and within moments, the group was surrounded. The doors slammed shut behind them, trapping them in a narrow hallway with no escape. From the shadows emerged a new wave of enemies, different this time. These weren't just the standard cybernetic soldiers. These were something more. Their bodies were augmented beyond recognition, their limbs far too long and unnaturally flexible, their eyes glowing with the same strange light that had emanated from the Syndicate leader's device. These were elite operatives, the true agents of the Syndicate, and they were ready to fight to the death. "They're getting smarter," Vance muttered, taking his position alongside the rest of the team. "These won't be as easy to bring down." "We don't have the luxury of time," Alira snapped. "We need to push through. Jara, are we clear on the comms?" "Almost there, Captain." Jara's voice crackled through the earpieces. "I've managed to secure a backup relay. Once you're inside the core room, I can lock down the systems, but it's going to take a full shutdown to stop them completely. You've got to hold them off until then." Alira nodded sharply. "Understood." With a single command, she motioned for the squad to engage. The elite Syndicate operatives leaped forward, their movements too fast, too erratic for normal human soldiers to predict. But the Crimson Guard had trained for this. They had faced impossible odds before. They weren't about to falter now. The first few moments were a blur of motion, with gunfire and energy blasts tearing through the narrow hallway. Alira fired with precision, dropping two of the augmented soldiers before they could even reach her. But the others didn't stop. They moved in a coordinated attack, closing the distance rapidly. Vance tackled one of the operatives to the ground, engaging in hand-to-hand combat as the soldier's long limbs whipped around him. The sound of metal grinding against metal filled the hall as the two struggled for dominance, Vance using his brute strength to overpower the enhanced soldier's unnatural flexibility. But Alira's focus was on the bigger picture. She moved like a shadow, fluid and purposeful, directing the recruits with lethal precision. She was the calm center in the eye of the storm. "Focus fire," she shouted. "Pin them down. Don't give them room to breathe." The recruits responded with disciplined efficiency, their weapons working in unison. Plasma rounds and kinetic projectiles filled the air as they created a wall of fire, forcing the Syndicate operatives to retreat momentarily. "We've got them on the back foot," one of the recruits shouted. But Alira's instincts told her this wasn't over. The Syndicate's elite operatives weren't backing down. They were regrouping. The sound of machinery whirring echoed as the walls shifted. Alira's eyes darted toward the doors. They were sealing off, and the core room was within their grasp. But the Syndicate was taking its last stand. "This is it," Alira muttered. "We're going in." She led the charge forward, kicking open the reinforced door with a single swift motion. Inside, the core control room was massive, an intricate web of systems and power conduits. The room was bathed in a sickly green light, and at the center of the room stood a massive terminal, a network of conduits branching out like veins across the walls. The core itself hummed ominously, and standing in front of it, silhouetted against the glow, was another figure, one Alira had not expected. A woman, tall and imposing, her eyes glowing with the same energy as the syndicate leader. Her armor was sleek, black, and reflective, adorned with symbols that Alira couldn't decipher. But there was no mistaking the malicious aura radiating from her. Well, the woman said, her voice smooth and cold. The famed Crimson Guard. I wondered when you would show up. Alira's pulse quickened, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. Who are you? The woman smiled, a sharp, knowing grin. I am the one who will finish what he started. And you? She laughed softly. You're just a distraction. With a flick of her hand, she activated the terminal, and the core systems began to glow brighter, the pulsing light intensifying as the countdown began. It's already too late, she said, her voice a deadly whisper. Alira's blood ran cold. The real fight had just begun. The room seemed to grow colder as the woman's smile widened, her fingers dancing across the terminal's glowing interface. Alira's instincts screamed. They were so close, so painfully close to stopping the syndicate. But now it seemed like the end was slipping from their grasp. Stop her, Alira shouted, her voice sharp as she stepped forward, raising her weapon toward the mysterious woman. Her hand trembled, but not from fear. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The countdown was already starting, and if they didn't act now, the entire planet, maybe even more, would fall into the syndicate's hands. But the woman merely chuckled, her eyes flashing with an unsettling mixture of amusement and superiority. You really think you can stop me? You've been playing right into our hands since you arrived on Syrtis. Alira narrowed her eyes, stepping forward. Who are you? The woman's smile never wavered. You can call me Kayla. I'm the architect of the syndicate's plan. And today, you will witness the birth of a new era. Alira's mind raced. The syndicate had a backup plan. And Kayla wasn't just a soldier. She was something more, someone in command. It explained the precision of their operations. But why had they allowed themselves to be slowed down so much? Why not just overwhelm them at the beginning? You've been baiting us, Alira muttered, realization dawning on her. All this was just a diversion. Kayla's smile faded slightly, but her voice remained ice cold. A diversion, yes, but not just for you. For the Empire. For everyone. You're nothing but pawns on the board. Before Alira could respond, Kayla's hand shot out, and a wave of energy rippled from the terminal. It hit Alira like a physical blow, sending her stumbling back, her breath knocked out of her. She hit the floor hard, struggling to regain her footing as the world spun around her. Captain. Vance's voice was distant, panicked. She could hear him calling for reinforcements, but she couldn't move. The room seemed to spin as the energy in the air thickened, pressing down on her like a vice. The countdown from the terminal began to accelerate, and Alira realized the woman was about to launch whatever weapon the syndicate had been planning all along. Her mind snapped back into focus. She couldn't let this happen. Jara, can you override the system? Alira managed to gasp into her comms, struggling to get her bearings. I'm on it, Captain, came Jara's strained voice. But I need more time. The encryption is well beyond anything we've seen. Alira gritted her teeth. How much time? Maybe 30 seconds. Her heart raced. 30 seconds. That was barely enough time to act. Kayla laughed, her eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light as she continued to manipulate the controls. 30 seconds. You really think that will change anything? You're too late. My plan is already in motion. The words hit Alira like a slap, but the fire within her didn't die. Instead, it burned brighter. The Syndicate wanted to play mind games. Fine. She was done playing their game. With a surge of adrenaline, Alira pushed herself to her feet, forcing her muscles to work despite the heavy weight of exhaustion. Vance had already closed the distance between them, his weapon drawn, but the augmented soldiers he had been fighting were closing in again, blocking the exit. "We need to get to her now," Alira said, determination fueling her every word. "We can't let her finish the countdown." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward Kayla. Every step was a battle. Against the pain, against the pressure in her chest, against the overwhelming odds. The countdown on the terminal continued, now only 10 seconds remaining. Kayla didn't even glance up as Alira charged forward, her movements cold and calculating. She only raised a hand, and an invisible barrier of energy slammed into Alira, knocking her backward once more. The impact left her gasping for air, her vision swimming. "Is that all you have, Captain?" Kayla taunted. "You were never meant to stop this." But Alira was no longer listening. With a roar, she scrambled to her feet, diving toward the terminal, determined to reach it before it was too late. The air crackled with the energy surrounding them as the countdown continued relentlessly. Vance, seeing her move, rushed forward as well, covering her back, his blaster firing in rapid succession. The augmented soldiers surged forward, but the recruits were right behind him, providing cover fire to push them back. The sound of plasma blasts filled the room as the two sides clashed, but Alira's focus remained on Kayla. The woman's eyes widened in surprise as Alira reached the terminal. With a final, desperate effort, Alira hurled herself at the controls, slamming her hand onto the interface. The moment her fingers made contact, everything seemed to freeze. The countdown stopped dead at 1 second. For a heartbeat, there was silence. And then, with a surge of power, the terminal systems flickered violently, as if in protest. Sparks flew from the panels, and Kayla's eyes widened in fury. She tried to push Alira away, but the force of her touch was too weak now, the connection between her and the terminal weakening. "No," Kayla screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the crackling of the failing system. The lights in the room flickered once more, and then the terminal shut down completely, its glow fading into nothingness. The countdown was over. The weapon was deactivated. Alira collapsed to her knees, breathing hard, the last of her energy drained. The recruits, with the aid of Vance, had cleared the last of the Syndicate's forces, but the battle was still far from over. Kayla, now defeated, staggered backward, her eyes wide with shock and rage. "This isn't over," she hissed, but it was clear the fight was slipping from her grasp. "You've lost," Alira said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Your plan is finished." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she straightened herself, her hands still trembling with fury. "This is just the beginning, Captain. You've won this battle, but the war is far from over." With that, Kayla vanished into the shadows, leaving the Crimson Guard standing in the ruins of the control room, victorious, for now. But Alira knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The Syndicate would rise again, and when they did, the Crimson Guard would be ready.